Welcome to Q&A practice. We'll start with the plaintiff attorney. Ready? Here we go. And as with telephone and visitation, is there any legal requirement that any particular immediate family member be allowed to communicate by mail with the inmate? No. So someone could be disapproved even though they are immediate family, correct? Finally, you've described H unit. Is this a self-contained cell block within ADX? Yes, it is. It's an inmate. How are these inmates housed within the cell block? Is it multiple cells or single cells? It's single cells. Each inmate is assigned to a single cell. And are inmates permitted to mingle or communicate with other inmates outside of H unit? No. Do you know whether there are recording facilities or capabilities to monitor anything that is said by an inmate inside of H unit? Yes, there are, but it's law enforcement privilege. I'd like to add to that, but yes, there are. Okay, without going into the details of how that's done, yes, I'd prefer to not go into specifics, but there are. I understand, and that monitoring also permits recording of any conversation that inmates may have or attempt to have with each other within the unit. Yes. Do you know how many inmates under SAMS are currently on H unit today? As of the 7th of last month, there were 27. All right, and do you know how many cells are in the unit? There's 34 in the unit, 34 cells. So there are empty cells there now, yes. Now, you've told us that these procedures, the SAMs, can be renewed annually, yes. Are there some prisoners who may spend many years under these procedures? Yes. Are there prisoners still in H unit who have been there since it was created to house SAMS inmates back in 2002? Yes, there are. Now, if an inmate is well behaved, does the Federal Bureau of Prisons have the authority to remove these communications restrictions on its own authority? No, they do not. Who has the authority, sole authority to do that? It would be the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office or Attorney General. The Attorney General, acting on the recommendation, right? And I suppose that leads me to the next question. Does the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI, who investigate or prosecute a case, have any role in the decision to renew the SAMs? Yes, they do. And that role is what? Well, they're asked for recommendations, and then there's a report compiled and it's sent up to OEO and then up to the Attorney General. If the Bureau of Prisons, the FBI, or the U.S. Attorney suspect that a prisoner is attempting to defeat the restrictions to communicate in some way despite these restrictions on communications, what sorts of measures are available to deal with that? Well, they can totally take away his telephone privilege, his correspondence privilege, and his visitation privilege. When a prisoner is sent to the H unit on ADX under a SAMS, does the Bureau of Prisons have the power to send him to another institution where he would not be subject to the special administrative measures on its own say-so? No, they would not. Do you know how many since 2002? And that is the time when this procedure was created. Is that correct? Correct. How many life sentence terrorist offenders convicted of terrorist offenses under the SAMS, excluding prisoners with medical issues, were either designated directly to ADX or ended up there? All but one. And how big a group are we talking about? There were 34 total, and 33 went to the G or to the H unit, and one went to a medical center, and one went to a medical center, correct, presumably because he needed to be there. Yes. Can you give us some examples of, without naming any names, some of the types of offenses of people who have ended up? Your Honor, objection overruled. You may have it. Can you list some of the offenses for which people are convicted and are serving their time under SAMS at H unit? Your Honor, may we approach on that? All right. I'll rephrase the question, Your Honor. All right. Without naming the specific crimes or the specific offenders, can you give us some sense of the types of offenses for which people have objection? I think I have to see you. I'm just trying to bring out these are serious terrorist offenses, and maybe it goes without saying. Well, just so I understand the controversy, let me know what touched the nerve, the attempt to try to do some comparative analysis to bring out the fact that there is people that, in addition, Your Honor, I just want to also say that the suggestion may be, without being intentionally made, may be received by the jury that this is an indication that people who commit these kinds of crimes don't generally get the death penalty. Correct. And Your Honor, while we're here, Mr. Bruck has now shown the photo of ADX from the sky, trying to make it look like it's on the moon. He now has zoomed in on ADX, and he's talked about the defendant will be in a single cell. I think we have every right to talk about all of the issues we discussed previously. He's trying to, you have got plenty of room on what he has done by sticking to my ruling. If the government for some reason decided not to renew the SAMs as to Mr. Sarnev and he were sent to ADX, or let's say he were sent to ADX and then at some point in the future the government chose not to renew the special administrative measures that is currently in effect to restrict his communications, is it likely that he would nevertheless remain at ADX? In my opinion, he would remain at the ADX. And why do you say that? Based on your knowledge of the rules and regulations of the Federal Bureau of Prisons? Well, the Bureau of Prisons has what's called the Central Inmate Monitoring System, which designates inmates in certain categories. Say there's a fight between two inmates, they make them separates. They can never be in the same institution at the same time. There's also one called special supervision, and that's based upon the nature of the offense that the inmate is sentenced under. And then there's broad publicity is a separate category, and that's because of the inmate's offenses received such wide publicity. Basically everybody knows who he is, and so two of these categories would apply in this case. He carries those assignments now. Very well, all right, that's all I have to ask you about ADX. I do want to ask you one other thing. Did you review Mr. Sarnev's Bureau of Prisons records from the 2 years that he has spent in pretrial confinement at the Federal Medical Center at Devens, Massachusetts? Your Honor, objection. May we approach on this point? All right. Your Honor, we have zero notice that they were using Mr. Bezzi to get into his records for the 2 years he's been at Devens. In fact, we have zero notice of what Mr. Bezzi was going to say, but Mr. Bruck represented to me that he was only going to be talking about his experience in working at BOP, not his former records. We had a very informal conversation in which I asked whether the government needed a written Rule 16 summary, and Mr. Mellon told me if it's the usual thing that Bezzi does, which invariably involves reviewing his records, all we're going to ask is the following question: how many disciplinary violations did you find on his Bureau of Prisons institutional record over the 2-year period since his arrest on April 19th? And we anticipate the answer would be none. That is the extent of the testimony, simply that he has a clean record of disciplinary violations. It's not a point of contention. Those are the facts. And after Mr. Mellon told me that we didn't need to provide anything, I'm a little taken aback to be told that we didn't provide enough. No, Your Honor, there's two separate issues altogether, and Mr. Buck should know that. It's one thing to call an expert who has worked at BOP to talk about what the BOP does and the procedures the BOP follows. It's another thing altogether to have someone come in and talk about reviewing records. If we had been told there would be a review of records, we would be able to look at them now, go through them, and make sure his answer is correct. I know for a fact that the answer is not correct for at least one instance that Marshal Roach could talk about, in which he acted out on a transport from Devens to this courthouse. So I don't believe that is a correct answer. Well, there is no institutional infractions, but I don't think it's a serious notice problem necessarily. I'm concerned about the accuracy of the information, but we'll leave it alone. Yeah, okay, thank you, Mr. Bezzi. Please answer any questions the government may have for you. Mr. Bezzi, good afternoon. Good afternoon, Mr. Bezzi. You never actually worked at ADX, correct? Correct. The only times you've been to ADX has just been as a walkthrough, correct? No, I've done a staff assist of the Correctional Services Department as a pre-audit, pre-program review. I've been part of a regional office team that went in and spent a week there doing an institutional character profile of the entire complex. Every time I go out to the complex and do a staff assist visit to any of the facility there, we're always required to go visit all of the institutions. As a warden, I did an after-action review of a serious incident that occurred at the ADX, so I've been there quite a few times. And actually, I flew in with the last load of high-security inmates when we shut down Marion. I was on the plane with them from Marion to the ADX. I'm quite familiar with the ADX. Right, and when was that you did this fly-in from Marion into ADX? 2005. Okay, now there's been changes at the ADX. Wait, that was 2005. Excuse me, 1995. Right, there have been changes to the ADX since using your first number, 2005. Correct, correct. Okay, there were changes made certainly since 1995. Correct. Correct. How many times have you been on the H unit? Probably the last time I was on it was in, I think, 2005, right? So you haven't been there in 10 years, correct? I was there just last month to the H unit. H unit, yes. I thought you said the last time you were there was 2005. I toured it last month on the 7th. I was in the unit. Did you go in and see the cells? No, they wouldn't let us go downrange because of sensitivity of the unit, right? So when you say you went into the H unit, what did you go into? We went into the entrance, we went into the, you can stand and see down the ranges, we went outside, saw the recreation yards, and basically that, right, you were at the control booth in the middle, correct? We went beyond the control booth, and when you say you're looking down the range, that means you're looking down the hallway, but the cells are actually off on the sides, correct? Correct. All right, that will conclude our Q&A practice.